Welcome to Going In Blind. I'm your host, Zach Tidwell. I guess your sick host, Zach Tidwell. For those of you who are new, I don't normally sound all raspy like this. I'm getting over something. I was traveling for the past couple weeks and seemed to have picked something up in the airport. But I have a couple episodes to record this week, so you'll have to bear with me for these next these next few. But with all of that out of the way, my guest today is there's a lot going on here. I think probably what is most important to her is the fact that she's a mother of six, but she's also a professional writer and has the founder of the Colin James Barth Outreach Foundation, which is helping women with career, legal, and financial assistance when they are in crises or experiencing crises. And it's an incredibly powerful mission, but there are also two incredibly strong women behind all of this. And I am so excited to get to hear their story and help share it, hopefully, today. I do have a couple quick announcements, though. For those of you who are not familiar with my story, there is quite a wild background behind this podcast and everything that I do today, whether it be speaking or the book that I have on the way. You can go read a little bit about that on my website at zachtidwell.com and also join the mailing list there so that you can get announcements about the book as I have more updates on that. But now we can get into Julie's story. So please welcome Miss Julie Barth. Hey, Julie.
Hey, Zach. Hi. Thanks
Thanks.
for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. You and I talked a little offline here, and I was trying to figure out the best place to jump in. And I think it's, pre your daughter Taytem being born, I guess up until that point, how is she your last child, or what was the family situation at that point?
Oh, no. She was my second. So I
Okay.
had an older son who was about 5 years old when Tatum was born. But I had married my grammar school sweetheart. We parted ways for a couple of years, but it was my first kiss in grammar school. So kind of met up in a bar, and it was like I found, the piece that had been missing that I didn't even know was missing. And we moved in together, and his parents, his parents had gotten divorced. My parents were divorced, and I guess we kind of were like, we don't need to be married, to live together and to have this life together. So we ended up having my son, and he was about 4. We lived downtown Chicago. We were living the Chicago single scene or couple without kid. And we decided that, it was time for us to move back to the suburbs and give him like more of a, green space kind of existence. So we moved back home, and I really wanted a big family. So at that point, we decided to try and expand. And where my oldest son was very, he was a surprise. The second one was very hard to come by. I had 2 miscarriages, and then I found out I was pregnant with Tayte, our second child. So, like, right out the gate, she just wouldn't grow. Like, I went in and they'd say, "Oh, congratulations, you're 6 weeks," and it got to be where because I had had the miscarriages, they were monitoring me pretty closely. So, 10 weeks, it was like, "Oh, she's 6 weeks," and it was it's always a different ultrasound technician, so she didn't really know. And so by about the 12th week, I think she was measuring about 9 weeks, and I did have a placental tear that had repaired. And it was really just 9 months of what's wrong with Tatum. I was told everything from she had trisomy 18, which is 318 chromosomes, and would come out and not be able to breed or exist. But then I had an amniocentesis. She was fine. But then they told me she had some kind of genetic thing. But all throughout the 9 months, they could never pinpoint anything that was wrong. I could see her on the screen. She was small, but there weren't any markers for genetic abnormalities or so. At about 37 weeks, I was a mess. She seemed to be okay. I was monitored very heavily, but I just couldn't take it anymore. So they delivered, and they really just weren't prepared for her size. She came out about 3 pounds, and they thought she was going to be closer to 5 or 6 just because of instrument error. And
Yeah.
yeah, so they weren't, like I said, we weren't in a NICU, we weren't in a trauma center. So they used the wrong size intubation tube, albeit to keep her alive. But unfortunately, it did a lot of damage to her vocal cords, which we were misled about for a very long time. So, everything that was going on with her, some of it was genetic, I suppose, But had she not had that start where because they damaged her throat so severely that she needed a trach, and the trach caused vomiting, and the vomiting, so it was a cycle, and it went on for 3 years where, we went from hospital to hospital. Um, and really nobody it was 2001, I couldn't Google it, which is probably a good thing. But communities weren't talking about rare diseases or genetic things. There were the ones that everyone knew about. But we even went to the Mayo Clinic, and they said, well, she's just small. So when she turned about 4, we had had reconstructive airway surgery. She was doing fine. And someone came up to me. People started coming up to me in the store and saying, "Is your daughter the one on that Discovery Channel show?" And as you can imagine, I was like, no. So, it was in my ear. It wasn't just one person. And I was like, that's weird. But, and she had it, she was very small, and she looked different. So I just kind of thought, well, I kind of just kept discounting it until my best friend came to me and she said, "I know what Taytem has." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I'm glad you do." But sure enough, the internet came along, and I punched in something called Primordial Dwarfism, and up popped every one of Tatum's. They used to say she looked funny. Up, popped her small stature, her beginning. It was like reading everyone else's pregnancy. It was like right
Mm.
there. So it
All of
explained
those
everything.
kind of
Yeah.
telltale, like all of your experiences matched in with that, the experiences
Most of
everyone else is
them.
having. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, a good majority of them were surrounded around medical malpractice and a lot of hiding. But yeah, globally, what was going on with her, why she never really just soared and took off even after the trach was out, was kind of
Okay.
explained in that moment.
Okay. You could.
So, yeah. Um, so my husband came home, and I said, and this is true to my husband, Colin, that was his name. I said, "Gosh, and I'm desperately crying." And I said, "Found out today what Tatum has. Come here, come here, come here." And I, brought him over to the computer, and he looked at the computer, and he nodded his head, and he said, "Okay, what's for dinner?" And I was like, "What do you mean, what's for dinner? Like, our daughter has this rare genetic thing." And he was just like, "Oh, nothing's changed, Julie." And in that moment, like, he was always that person to say, like, "What does that mean? Like, how does that change what we're looking at?"
It's just very pragmatic almost.
Yeah, like,
Like
and
it
he
is
said
what
to
it is.
me, yeah, and he goes, "Did you think she was normal?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of did. Like, I was living in my own little world where she was going to be just fine and grow, to be, yeah."
Do you think you were in denial a little bit?
Um, maybe, but I think more of it was we had been told so many things from the start. We had been told, we'd been lied to, we've been dismissed, we'd have things thrown at us that didn't come true. And I think that I always was everyone else is so focused on what's wrong with Tatum. I was more focused on, let's just get her to be here. Like, who cares what's going on globally? Like,
Yeah.
those are great things to find out if you can do something about them. But I've always been somebody like, don't tell me something if I can't do anything about it, especially if you don't know for sure. So, that was always there was a book when I was pregnant. It was like what to expect when you're expecting. And I remember getting to chapter 2, and I was like, why would anyone want to read this? Because it was all the things that could go on. And I thought, why do you want to know before you know if you can't do anything about it?
You're like catastrophizing what might happen.
Yeah,
Huh.
I mean, well, for a warrior like me, I tend to worry a lot. It's literally just like I could sit here and think, "Oh my gosh, oh my god," or I could just say, "All right, well, she's here. She's small. I had her in OT. I had her in physical therapy. I found ways to make her the best she could be, no matter what was going on with her." So, was I in denial? No, I think I just didn't care. In that
Yeah.
moment, I suppose it dawned on me that I cared. But for many years, I thought I don't care what she has. Let's just make her the
Yeah.
best she is. So,
And I'll come back and pick up where we left off here. You'd mentioned like you guys were lied to and that there obviously was medical malpractice if they intubated her with a tube that ruined her throat. But
yes.
were you able to seek any sort of recourse for any of that or how did all that turn out?
Well, the thing about Tatum is that, like, she is everything that happens to Tatum. It's like you just go, How did that happen?" It's like one thing after another. So it wasn't one incident of medical malpractice. I like to believe that. nobody, in my heart believe that nobody goes into medicine to hurt somebody. And
Especially not with babies. Yeah.
yeah, and I do believe that everybody's there for the right reason. The where I take issue is like it would not be okay in any other career path to not take responsibility or to cover something up. And I feel like the medical community, and I'm sure it's because malpractice and you lose everything with one incident. But if you just take responsibility, because there were things that we could have done to stop the carnage and to help her at that point, but instead they were so hell bent on saying we didn't do anything. Something's wrong with her. It was almost like leading us down, a scavenger hunt where there were no pieces instead of staying where we were supposed to be and saying, okay, you damaged her throat. Like, for instance, when they damaged her throat, all they had to do was give her antibiotics, even preventative care, and they didn't. And, you sit back and you think, well, why wouldn't they do that? And then you realize, well, that would probably be in the medical notes that she needed, antibiotics. And if it didn't go well for them, then they would have to explain why they gave her antibiotics.
Yeah.
So it's just, but there were many incidents like they put an adult size feeding tube into her, which held open her, she was throwing a pile and, we went to the Mayo Clinic and she almost died and they pulled out the tube and they said, well, that's because this is a 16cc, which is a medical term, adult feeding tube, not a child. And you've got it. She was 7 pounds when they put in literally an extra large size human. And
Wow.
we were in the hospital and nobody got it. So, or didn't care enough because I think there comes this point where, I had become a problem to them. I was, I had been labeled as somebody who couldn't accept the truth or somebody who made problems all the time. But, when you take your kid in, and I would take her in for like, she was wheezing, and the next thing I know, she's flatlining. So anything that could go wrong with Tatum has always gone wrong with Tatum. In fact, when she turned 13, after all of this, after healing, after losing her dad, after she came down with a rare form of connected tissue cancer, um, which had her right side torso removed and her legs
Mm.
grafted. So it's just like when it comes to Tatum, nothing shocks me, nothing surprises me. And to try and spend my life trying to recoup for, whatever, like I said, I think that a huge part of why she's all right and I'm all right at this point is because we don't hold grudges. I can't, I have to believe that there was a reason why they did what they did and they didn't do it intentionally. Again, I wish that they had been honest about it, but we are where we are and we just keep struggling along. So.
Yeah. And just, I don't think I mean, I'd heard of dwarfism like everyone has, but I'd never heard of primordial dwarfism. Is that the official term for standard dwarfism, or is this something separate?
So there are hundreds types of dwarfism, my joke, and
Okay.
I can honestly say that I've never had her formally diagnosed with that because there is no real diagnosis besides, and that's I think why I was able to find out after the fact, after people started talking on social media, because it was considered a very, very rare form of dwarfism. And for instance, like the smallest person alive has primordial dwarfism. The difference in
Okay.
primordial dwarfism versus a different type of dwarfism is that they're proportionate. They're just tiny, tiny people. Um,
Huh.
yeah, so she's less than 4 feet, but you almost, if you're walking down the street, you would almost have to rub your eyes and be like, she looked completely normal or like the average person, but first, she was just a small version. It's almost like when you get a
Mm.
miniature puppy, and I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm just trying to give everyone the perspective of what it is. Um, and they do have certain characteristics, very thin. She couldn't gain weight if she tried. She's 24 and she weighs 24 pounds. And, I could feed her all day long through a feeding tube and she never gained weight. It's just the body, I guess, in this type
Really?
of situation just will not gain weight. Yeah. Which has been a struggle her whole life. And, um, but so it's just, I'm sure that there's very different subtitles within that. And
Yeah.
I think they're just really starting to learn more as people talk that it's really not as rare as, as it was slated to be when it first came out on, say the Discovery Channel show. Now that people are talking,
Do you know how generally or roughly how common it is?
when I read about it, it was like 1 in 5 million. But
Okay.
again, the way that the diagnosis is, they have to be within, 39 inches, and Tatum still doesn't fall within whatever that was. She was 30. So, there are times when I go out into the public and I see people and I think, it's a spectrum, as is any genetic, anything that we have as humans. There's a whole spectrum of it. So she probably falls on the high spectrum of it. And had she, you know, in theory, had she not had this rough start, had she not, there's the potential that there's really not much that comes along with it until later on in life when they have issues with their joints, and sometimes they can have issues with brain aneurysms. But besides, like, memory and remote learning kind of things. I think a lot of these people are just out in public and they probably don't know. I think it would be like any other. I would just always say Tatum has Tatum syndrome. Like, that's always been my approach. She's got
Yeah.
Tatum syndrome. Let's just leave it at that. So
And that speaks to kind of what you were saying before I went back with these questions. You had mentioned that Colin, when you told Colin that you thought you knew what she had, that was his response. And you want to pick back up on that thread and follow that farther?
sure. So we went about our lives and we proceeded to have two. I always wanted a huge family. So we proceeded to have two more children, and where we had nursing care for Tatum for about 2 years and traveled the country, and it was chaos. And it was, it was some really horrible years. We were starting finally to become humans again. We lost our friends, because you can't go out, you can't go to weddings, you can't. And we were in our, young 30s. So when everyone else was being social, we couldn't. But
Yeah.
we almost returned to life. He started coaching football and, being involved in the community. And we were a huge part of the community. And we were having a Halloween party, which we did every year because we lived about a block from the grammar school. And we'd have, 350 people in our home and open it up to everyone. And for about 6 months, he just wasn't acting like himself, but he had had back surgery. I knew he was in pain, but he kept going back and forth to the doctor and saying his stomach hurt, and he was a trader down at the Board of Trade. So we all kind of just chalked it up as stress and coming off of Tatum, and there is that exhale period when you just kind of like fall apart 'cause you can't for so many years. So but at a certain point, I just said, I don't know what's wrong, but you need to go to the hospital and figure this out because I need you back. Like, I miss you, I miss your wit and everything else, and you just seem to be so, not yourself. So he went into the hospital, and within, 4 hours, we found out that he had a tumor on his pancreas and several lesions in his liver. And a day from that, or a couple days from that, we were brought in and we were told that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had metastasized to his liver. And, they were not very generous with it. I think the oncologist comment to me was, well, if you're going to have a form of cancer, this is the worst one to have, which I don't know why anyone would say
That's
that to
not the
you.
thing to say. Yeah.
And then I got say he has 2 weeks live, take him home, let him say goodbye to his children. And, our youngest was 6 months and our oldest was 10,
Wow.
and Tatum sandwiched in between. And yeah, it was a big shock. Although his mother had, ovarian cancer, and she had lived an additional 30 years past diagnosis when they didn't think she'd make it through surgery. So I guess we had the advantage of saying, well, it's genetically linked. She did so well. You know, I didn't want to, again, was I in denial? No, but I chose, okay, you say 2 weeks, we'll see.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were lucky enough to get him into a trial, and he was doing really, really well. And took a couple weeks off to go to my son's baseball conference, which I was worried about him doing, but I knew that he had to do what he felt he had to. So when we returned, it had spread, and at that point, they kicked him out of the study. So that was just a
Jeez.
downhill spiral. Yeah, that was a hard. Of all the medical things I've been through, and the callous nature of the medical field sometimes, and necessarily so, I'm sure. I think that was the hardest one to stomach because where we were rock stars, it was like he was our star patient. We would come in and they'd give us our own room, and it had gone so well that they thought that they were going to be able he was going to go for cancer. I mean, for surgery. And
Yeah.
within here we were on cloud nine thinking, oh, you're going to be just like your mom, to, a month later being kicked out, and no hope at all.
And Is all of this, I guess I've got a couple questions here. When you were mentioning all of the care for Tatum, like, were you guys able to get some sort of state programs to help cover all of that, or were you guys having to shell all that out of pocket?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
He was a successful trader, so luckily he started becoming successful after Tatum was born. But we were left with tens of thousands of dollars in bills. Um, there was a point, and this is kind of the crux of the charity that I run and everything else. There was a point where Tatum, we couldn't get her out of the hospital. She had a trach, and she needed to be watched 24 hours a day, and the insurance company was saying, "Oh, well, you two can be caregivers." And I was saying, "Well, I have my son and he's 5 and I can't stay up all night and take care of her during the day." "Oh, no, you can be taught. This is fine. You can do that." And then I had the medical professionals telling me, "Don't take her out of the hospital because once you take her out of the hospital, you admit that you don't need nursing care." So I was stuck for 3 months in this bubble of trying to get it approved, and it got to the point where, true to me, I called an investigative news person for Channel 5 News, and, I was on the news, and nothing came of it, but I was going after Blue Cross Blue Shield saying this should not, because they were denying children across the board with trachs. That was their thing,
Yeah.
it's like a systematic, and they hoped that you gave up, took your kid home, and you were done with it. So I nothing happened with us, but I did find this really small charity. It was called like Specialized Children in Chicago, and they ended up picking up our nursing tail. So about a year later, after everything was said and done, one of my friends had a mother whose son had a trach, and she set us up. She was like, Julia's been there, so I'm talking to this woman, and I think her son was like 2 or 3 weeks old, and I said, right now you need to work on getting insurance, like getting nursing. And I said, there's this little division. Oh no, we have great insurance. I'm like, yeah, I thought we did too. I'm like, but and I was trying to give her the information that I had, and she said to me, "Oh, no, that's not the thing anymore." She said, "Some woman was on the Channel 5 News a couple months ago going after the insurance company, and now they've made it mandatory that kids with trait get nursing care." So, and it was me. And so that's why I feel that once you go through something like this and you have to jump through hurdles, if you stop to help out that situation, and everybody did, then our world, you can make a softer landing for the next person that comes through so that they're not going through all the hurdles that you had to find to get. If you have knowledge, put it out there, let other people know about it so they don't have to hit crisis and figure it all out again. So,
And I mean, that's honestly part of what drew me to your story. And I know we'll get into the foundation as we get further along the timeline here, but it's that, I think everybody does. We admire like when you can turn whatever struggle you've had into some sort of purpose that is benefiting others. Like there's what's more respectable than that? Like it is just it's very honorable and it's powerful and it's very striking. And I mean, it's like, God, you guys have just been through one thing after another with all this stuff. Like when you mentioned being very hopeful, and I reasonably so, I think even when you said that Colin's mom was lived for another 30 years after diagnosis, and you guys expected with the way things were going and with that news that he was going to follow in her footsteps. What was that like for both of you guys when that turned out not to be the case?
um, you know, Colin was always very positive. Unfortunately, because his mother had lived 30 years, he kind of had this mindset of, I'm going to save up all my energy so that when I'm better, I can spend more time with the kids. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think he thought if he just like bottled it all up, that he would have a better prognosis. But unfortunately, I think he put his life on hold for a long time during that. And I would have done the same if I were him. But in those months, he really just suffered in silence and withdrew from our world and our lives. Stopped letting people come over. He only wanted people to see him, when he looked well.
Yeah.
If we went somewhere, he would go to the tan spa that day just so he wouldn't look so, you know. So I think that it was very important for him that other people thought he was doing well. And, being his wife, it was frustrating at the time because I thought, stop worrying about, how you look and how you look to other people and just, try and be here with us now. And I understand almost as if other people didn't believe it, then I almost thought, I think then he would lose faith in it. So he was looking to other people to draw his strength from.
Yeah.
And so we approached it very differently where, I just tried to take care of what I could. And yeah, I let him stay up in his room a lot, but there was a lot of guilt in that because, it's not that I wanted him to have his peace. But at the same time, I could just, you have to let people come to the table with what they're prepared to come with. And his mindset was always, I'm going to put my life on hold until. And my mindset was always, we have to live life. We have these 4 kids. They're going through so much between Tatum and, they've been through so much trauma and so many bad things that I always kind of dance through them. And I think I learned that with Tatum. As bad as things were when I was home with my son, I could not wear it. I could not bring it home. I had to shelf it and say, okay, I'm living 2 separate lives. And that's kind of how I navigated it is I just lived there was a life with Colin and caregiving, and then there was life with my children. And they didn't really intersect much, which, again, I would have guilt when I was with him, and then I would have guilt when I was with them because it always felt like I wasn't where I needed to be.
Um, do you feel like it's fair to say almost compartmentalizing things so that you could manage both? Is that what you
Oh,
feel?
100%.
Okay.
I still do it, like those things that serve us well. Because I think that I was brought up that way, my mom is very, like, do it yourself, don't let anyone help, you can do this, you don't need someone else, you don't and that's a great thing to teach your children, but I think mine was almost to the obsessive level of, you're gonna bother people if you ask for help, you're going to don't put your burdens on other people, deal with it yourself, and so I became very good at, yeah, doing what I needed to do, and I almost felt as if I let anyone in to help, it was like a house of cards, and if I let somebody, pick up the kids and they didn't, then my whole world was gonna fall because everything was so contingent upon something else.
In going through all of this, and I mean, we haven't covered everything yet, but like, have you allowed yourself the time to actually decompartmentalize that stuff and process it through therapy? Like, how have you gone through all this? Because it's your story is almost like a caricature, like you said, almost like with Tatum, where like things keep going wrong, but it is like your life has been that way too, at least in the past 25 years here. Like, how have you gone through all
Yeah, I
that?
think well, in going back into, the second part of my story, I didn't, like, when Colin passed, I was done, where when Colin passed, everyone else started to grieve, because they weren't there every day, they didn't see much of him at all. They felt the gravity of him not being there, and I was kind of in the mindset of I watched my best friend die every day. I lost a piece of him every day. And when everyone else just started to grieve, I was like, I can't sit in this grief anymore. It's almost like watching a really sad movie. It just keeps going on and on. You're like, you know what? Can't do it anymore.
Did you
So I did.
reprocess almost, do you think?
I think I went back and forth.
Yeah.
The problem was that it wasn't just that I was grieving Colin or processing Colin. It was that I was processing everything that went on with Tate. And if I sat down to really go, oh my gosh, like I don't know that I could have survived. I didn't have time to survive all of that. And in between there, which I go into in the book, we had a baby that was 20 months old when we went in and there was no brain, like all the fluid. And so, it was just one thing after another, where if I had, taken the time past, of course, I had 48 to 72 hours of, oh my gosh, this is terrible, fall apart, not want to see the kids lay in bed. I didn't have an extended period of time to say, okay, I'm really going to work through this. I didn't have time for therapy, to be quite honest. But I think that's what led into my second marriage is that I just didn't want to be me anymore. If I could just pack it all away, if I didn't deal with it, it didn't exist. If I just move away, no longer Julie Barth, I can reinvent myself. I can be whoever I want. I can have everything I always wanted, which is a big family and normalcy and no illness. And unfortunately, what you find out is that your problems follow you. And the more you try to ignore them, the louder they become. And that's what it was. It started being like a band playing all the time. And I was just doing everything I can to shut it down. Like, nope, nope, I'm not dealing with that. And I think that is what led to me finding there was a guy in my house. He was 10 years younger. He didn't care how I felt. He didn't want me to stop, slow down, process. He was like, no, let's just do this. Let's get out of here. Yeah, you don't want to be her. That's great. I don't, leave it behind. And so that's what we did. And in doing that, I did never deal with it. And I just kept bouncing. And when you keep bouncing, you don't ever make a conscious decision. You just go from one fire drill to the next. And that kind of became my pattern is, nope, everything's fine. I'm just going to not really think about it. This is the next course and this is the next course. So
Probably
you don't drift
subconsciously.
now.
Yeah, like subconsciously, you're probably running a little bit. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I talk about that in the book, and I was in. Not only was I an emotional runner, I was a physical runner. I would run 10 miles every other day just because when you run that type of mileage, you get to a point where you're literally not able, there's no energy left. You're not thinking about anything. You're just in the state of nothingness, and nothingness is exactly where I wanted to be.
yeah, it is a healthier, much healthier form of escape, but it is still a form of escape, and
Yes.
it's inner, and that's why I asked, like, it's, specifically compartmentalizing. I think that is a useful tool on a short time period, in an acute sense, it can be very powerful. I fell into something similar. That's how, trying to just hold stuff in is how I got to the point where I shot myself in the face. Like I kept running, but I ran from, it was the gym and stuff like that, but then it became alcohol and I just kept running and running and running and it finally caught up with me. And
Yeah.
that's exactly why I asked. It's just, it's really interesting hearing everyone has their own way. A lot of times, I don't know that I've met someone yet who's been through horrible things and found a healthy way through it. They end up in a healthy place afterwards, but usually there's a lot of mess. And it seems like you somehow seem to do it a little more gracefully than some others, but it was still.
I don't know about that.
No. Well, tell me about it. Keep going.
I think that that's it coming out of the grief of Colin. I didn't understand survivor's guilt. I didn't even, to me, survivor's guilt was like, somebody falls off the life ship and you have to save yourself. And I didn't recognize that it could be something like cancer. And, he's my best friend and lying to him for that 16 months, more toward the end when he would say like, oh, when are we going to chemo? I'd be like, oh, tomorrow, knowing full well I was lying to him. I'd lie to him all the time. And it almost became this cruel joke and where he didn't know and I was doing it for his benefit and really no one else around probably heard it. Like I heard it. I reminded, I remembered
It
it.
still rips at you. Yeah.
It does. And when they, you wish them gone. And then when they die, you think, oh my God, how could I wish him gone? Or how did I not spend enough time with them? Or, why didn't I prioritize?
Yeah.
And all of those things you can't do anything about. They sit in you and you ignore them, but they shape the way that you let other people treat you too. And so when my second husband came along and he was extremely emotionally abusive, I felt like I deserved it. I was kind of like, well, he's really mean to me, but he's right. I'm a bad wife, or he's really mean to my kids, but whatever it was, I excused it because I had so much internal conflict and like I deserved what I was getting because I think when that many bad things happen to you, you almost feel like, well, I must deserve it and I think other people come in and you make them feel vulnerable.
Yeah.
If your husband gets sick at 33 and dies of cancer, that makes everyone around you feel like, wow, that could happen to me. And they don't want to feel that way. So what they do is they almost like try and find a reason why it happened to you. Because if they can find a reason why it happened to you, then that makes them feel less vulnerable.
So all of a sudden
So
that's logical and there's a causality to it where like, oh, that doesn't apply to me kind of thing.
yeah, and I don't
Wow.
think that they know they're doing it, but yeah, where when Colin was alive, I was this, great caregiver and strong person and great mom. after he died, it was almost like she's going out too much, she's drinking too much, she's going out with this younger guy, she doesn't care about her kids. And I think that was, for me, the hardest part was, yes, was I escaping 100%. So when you say, like, I handled it better, I don't know that I handled it better. Everybody handles it differently. Sure,
Sure.
yeah, I drank with the best of them. I was never, to the point of being dysfunctional, but yeah, everybody has that way of just putting your brain on pause so that it doesn't go down that rabbit hole. So whether that was running, whether it was alcohol, and then I got to the point with my second husband where it was such an abusive relationship that I developed what they thought was fibromyalgia. And it got so bad, I couldn't run, couldn't get out of bed. Like my spine was twisting and there was no cause for it whatsoever. So I started taking like all kinds of muscle relaxers to get out of bed. So yeah, everything comes back, and it's all in degrees. But I think everyone in the position that you're speaking of and what I've experienced, you hit that point where you're just like, I've hit rock bottom, you know?
Yeah.
And you think, I feel so empty. I don't know how to fill this hole anymore because you filled it with so many toxic things that you're like, there's nothing more to fill it. And is this hole just going to break me? Am I going to, like the same rabbit hole? Is there any coming back from this numbness that I put myself in? And then when you stop numbing yourself, the bad feelings come back and you're not equipped to handle them because you've been numbing yourself to them for so long.
And that numbing, at least in my experience, I think that on a longer term like that, when you've just continued running and numbing things, that eats away at your ability to handle stress. Like when
Yeah.
you do fully then have to feel something, it's like you're not even you've been entirely unacclimated to it, and it makes it even worse. It's just this compounding runaway kind of ball of nastiness. But
And I say it's almost like an avalanche. Like if you don't address things when they're littered, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
yes,
And then you feel them harder because you can't numb yourself to them anymore. If you've done everything you can and you're still feeling it, where do you go from there? Because you hit this point where you're like, I can't escape it no matter what I do. And when you're a runner, that to you seems like I can't do this anymore.
yeah,
Maybe people that aren't, typical runners and don't just, or people that don't go through a whole lot of one after another. When you don't have time to rebound, I think you lose the ability to bounce anymore. And I think, that's what happened. And many, way down the line, I think after Tatum had cancer and dealing with my second husband, I had lost the ability to cope. And, the smallest thing, would just send me into this panic of, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose it. Someone's going to die because it felt like someone was going to die because in my world, people died. It wasn't like I was just saying like I felt like I was going to, people were dying around me.
like
And
everything was so intense that then you just had that
so
feeling all the time.
intense.
Wow.
And it never stopped. And so I had somebody in my life who knew that, and they would take that and they would run with it. He would threaten to leave me when I wouldn't do what he wanted. He would not come home and shut his phone off so that I would just go into this absolute panic where I really felt like if I did not, get it back together, that I was going to die. And it was probably 8 years of just that kind of torture,
Just
which was intended.
manipulation. Yeah.
And which was intended, and all the time he was telling everybody how crazy I was, and I was feeling crazy because I was doing things that I had never here I was, like, keeping Colin alive and taking care of 4 kids and Tatum's cancer, and I was okay through all that, and then someone enters my life and says, "You're crazy, look at the way you're acting," and would push every button I had, and then I would act crazy, so yeah, I mean, I got to a point where I thought, "Am I broken? Like, did all of this stuff with Colin and Tatum, did that break me? Am I not sane anymore?" So
Yeah.
I did. I went to many therapists and, there was no he would tell people I had, personality disorders, and he would tell people I was diagnosed with things that I wasn't. And I was literally just trying to seek a way to stop the pain and to stop feeling so bottomed out and empty my
Meanwhile,
whole
he's
life.
stoking the fire of it all.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, and I didn't realize the extent of it until, we had separated several times, but when it was finally over, he would tell me that he was leaving. And, you know, your brain doesn't want to think that somebody that you love and care about really is set out to sabotage you. So I would do a lot of gaslighting myself, like, Julie, come on, you're watching too many Dateline shows. He's not A, B, and C. But I was sitting in and I did find out a whole bunch of stuff, which I won't go into, but I was sitting on the front porch and I noticed we had a big tree. And it was always at nighttime, I would sit out on my front porch so that the kids wouldn't see me fall apart. And I would just sit out there and cry. And I noticed that there was a chair that was right out of reach, right behind the tree that I'd never really noticed before. And it was at that point that I took a walk around the property and I recognized that he had strategically placed chairs so that when he would set off this in me, this panic, this like, I couldn't breathe, he would sit and watch me and maybe videotape me. I don't know, because he was good at videotaping me and sending it to his friends. Um, but yeah, that was the level of it, mass. He was that mean and destructive, and
Yeah.
really just enjoyed watching me suffer for whatever reason that was. And I played right into it. So
He sounds like someone out of a movie. It really
he
does. Be-
he is, yeah, and that's why I do what I do, because I sit up here, I tell my story, and I think it's so interesting and out there. But I can't tell you the number of women and men, I suppose, but more my experience is women, because women come to me who are living that existence. And since emotional abuse is not considered abuse by our courts, and you don't really know what's going on, you're in a state of confusion, you're blaming yourself, that come to me and say, like, my husband did that too, or I'm in a relationship like that right now, and you don't even know it's happening. And I think that that's the insidious nature of emotional abuse is they tell you you're the problem, you're acting like the problem, you believe you're the problem, and you become the problem.
They're like brainwashing you.
Definitely. Yeah, and they find every one of your insecurities and they buttons to push, and yeah.
And forgive me if I go into this incorrectly or don't state this very eloquently. I would imagine, because we skipped over some stuff. I'm pretty sure we did, but I would imagine, obviously, vulnerable, like you've already touched on. I can't imagine what the grief was like losing Colin. You've already had all of these other things to your life. You mentioned the grief of, like, wishing that was gone, and then when he was gone, then feeling more guilt even for feeling like you'd wished he was gone. And then when I know did Tatum have cancer before you met this next guy? And like when and how did he come into the picture? Because it sounds to me almost like it was you were in a vulnerable place and he came along and that's how he was able to get his hooks into you almost. Is that accurate?
So, after Colin died, we had moved back to the same suburbs that, we met in, that we grew up in, and rebuilt a house, and it was our dream house. We took a cottage and we made it into, two-story, and every single part of it was us. And
And
so,
you and the kids is we in this case?
me and Colin and I had built
Okay.
this house. So the four kids and Colin and I lived in this house, and we had done so much to make it a home. So when he passed away, I wanted to move, but I also felt like my kids need the stability of not losing their dad and losing the house. And so I hired a guy who I knew to redo the house. So just certain parts of it, like move the kitchen. I'd always hated where the kitchen was because you would walk right in our house. And and the gentleman who I ended up marrying worked in my home. So,
Okay.
I go back and forth, and I don't presume to know people's motives. I don't, I think the one thing that I can say about humans is that we are unpredictable at any turn. Anytime we think that human beings are predictable, the only predictable nature is that we're unpredictable. So I don't
Yeah.
know what his intentions were. Yeah. I don't know what his intentions were. I only know that he was dating someone, and he was engaged to someone, and he was telling me how crazy she was, that she was doing drugs and she was an alcoholic and she was doing this and she was, And then one night she just didn't come home. And so I was listening to all of this. And, we were just, when I say friends, very close friends at that point. But after his fiance, she left. She went into, what I heard was she went into drug rehab. Um, you know, I it was almost like, "Oh, you're broken, I'm broken. We can fix one another." So I was under the guise that, this poor girl had beat him up and taken advantage of him, and that was and stolen all of his money. And it didn't it took me years and years and years to find out that, first of all, there's probably a reason why she was doing drugs, and probably him. She was also very young, moved straight from her parents into with him. And he messed around with marrying her and then not marrying her and marrying me. So,
By
no.
manipulation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, was she a drug addict and alcoholic? I don't know. It would be reasonable that she would have to numb herself, but that's the same story he told about me to everybody else. I became her. I was a new drug addict. I was a new alcoholic abusing him. So it, you know, there's a pattern with I think his relationships, and he was not a pattern of the relationships that I had known. Again, I'm not blaming anyone. Um, I don't. I'm not going to say what his motives were. I just know that, all I was looking for is somebody to be there for me. And it was a nightmare, because where I had had this very supportive human being at my side, and I thought that's what I was getting into. The very person that I thought was on my side was the one sabotaging me. The only way to make him look better was to make me look worse. And again, I played right into it. So I'm not playing, poor innocent me. But I don't think that I would have ended up where I was if he had not been there to scoop me up.
Yeah. And that's why I wasn't trying to have you make like claims on where he was at or anything. I think there's, I think this is valuable for other people to hear, men or women, who are just to know. I mean, this is how you almost got like groomed into this abusive relationship. And again, it is like, it's evil. That sounds so evil, like cartoonishly evil. How it just the manipulation there. And so I was that, that's kind of the impression that I'd gotten from what we talked about, but I wanted to make sure that it was discussed, I guess, intentionally, like the
Yeah,
circumstances.
yeah. I think it's funny in these types of things, because I think anyone has watched a documentary and you hear one side and you're like, oh, that makes sense. And you hear the other side and you're like, well, and I think that that's what these relationships always are. I don't think there's ever one person to blame. I don't think there's ever one cause for it. And the reason I tell the story that I do is because I spent a lot of years hanging on and trying to be in that relationship, because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to be the one that let it, fall apart. I didn't want to be the crazy one. I was so consumed by when we split up that he would find somebody and they would have a normal relationship, and I would have to admit it was me.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's at fault. What if you're in a relationship where you cannot seem to make it work and it is destroying you? You need to get out for no, and you might be the villain. I have no idea. I might have been the villain of that story. I can't tell you. I'm sure he's got his own story to tell. The only thing is that it doesn't matter. You only have one life to live. And if something is that destructive to you, and, I went down a path where I really think that I could have died. I was so, at a place where I just didn't know what else to do. I was so distraught. That song Halsey's Follow You to the Graveyard.
Yeah.
I really hit that bottom where I was like, I think I would have followed him anywhere and done anything to keep that intact. And that is grooming, because you just do a little bit and you become numb to it, and then you do a little bit more. And by the time you're done, the more you become numb to something, the louder that person has to become to either manipulate you or for you to be heard. So that's why I think emotional abuse is so dangerous, because sure, it's not physical yet, but when they stop being able to manipulate you through emotions or, words, then they necessarily have to take it up a notch. And that's when
Influence.
and it only takes once. Gabby Petito is a perfect example of that.
Who is that?
Gabby Petito is a young woman in her 20s, who was engaged to a boy, and they took off to go on this cross country. They were social media people, and they had built a van, and they were traveling around the United States. And Um, he was emotionally abusing her. It was on film and everything looked great, and they looked like they were so happy, but there was one incident where they were stopped by the police, and it's all on video, and the police and he said, like, "Oh, she's attacking me, she can't control her emotions, I locked her out of the van 'cause she was dangerous," and, she ended up dead the next day.
I remember
Or
hearing about
within
this.
within a couple years, yeah, or a couple days. And, and he made her seem the aggressor, and she was saying, "You're right. Yeah, yeah, I did strike at him. Yeah, I was really, really, I was very angry." And she was believing it herself. And it's situations like that where the police, had they been trained to see what was really going on, the calmness that he had, the sheer like melting that she had, anyone should have looked at that situation and said, "We gotta intervene," because I think what they did is they said, like, they set him up at a hotel and said, like, "You guys need a cool off period."
Yeah.
And obviously, it needed much more than a cool off period. But again, emotional abuse is not recognized, so it looked like she was just too emotional. I mean, how many times we hear that? You're too emotional. You can't control your emotions, so.
Gosh, that's terrifying. And that's so. Were you guys together when Tatum had cancer?
Yeah. So the minute that what happened was I got together with him within a year of us getting together. I decided I still wanted to go on with my big family, so I got pregnant with our fifth daughter or fifth child, my fifth child, and we moved across country. We moved to Charlotte, and that when we arrived there, he didn't wanna live in the suburbs, he didn't wanna live with people around us, and we bought this house up on the mountain with nobody around. It was so isolated, I didn't have any family, and right when we about 6 months to a year after we got there is when Tatum came down with cancer, and it was at that point, with the lack of any concern on his part, he didn't even come to the hospital, he wouldn't help with the kids, and it was at that point that I really recognized that his where I used to think him not questioning me or letting me be was done for my benefit, but it was really his benefit. He didn't want, and at that point I couldn't talk about Colin. No one was allowed to mention Colin. No one was allowed to talk about Colin. I wasn't allowed to put pictures up of Colin, and he just was nowhere to be found.
That's why I asked. I was like, what was this motherfucker like while you're going through something like that? Is with your kid having cancer? Like
I called him
sadistic.
home. Yeah, and she was in, anytime she would be, coming out of surgery, he wouldn't be there. He'd be like, "Oh, okay, I gotta go, A, B, and C." And, literally just left me to fend for myself. And I lost, my mother lived around us. I had extended family. So when I was in Chicago, I had people helping me. I had support, but I had so easily, not so easily, but what I had done is I just picked up and left because I didn't wanna be in me anymore, and I cut ties, very quickly, and I put myself in a position where I was isolated, and there was kinda in my head no going back, and he would tell me, "Everybody hates you. You can't go back. You have no friends there." And he was going back home and telling everyone that I was crazy, so people were approaching me, knowing things that I didn't know they knew or thinking things that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
So, everyone was treating me very hands off and like not answering me or trying to downplay what was going on in my world. And so, yeah, that was really when I began to see what I was really dealing with.
Well, that was going to be my next question was, did anyone around you like see this and try and tell you, but it was just bad combination of you kind of having unknowingly almost severed ties with everybody or unintentional. Fuck, it's like there's a horrendous mix of just like the circumstances just being right for this guy to do what he did.
Yeah, and I think right out the gate, obviously, people talked, about him being too young, about, it's not a good idea. I had a couple people, including my mother, saying, I don't know about this guy. But you would say things like your mother-in-law, came to me and said that she understood what you were getting out of the relationship, but didn't understand what I was, kind of indicating that everyone was on his side even before we left.
Hmm.
And when people would come to me, I think I didn't want to hear it. This is my ticket to my future. They didn't know him like I knew him. He was very he was, and when I say insightful, I don't mean like thinking. He used to love to incite people. He used to love to stir the pot. He said things that were very outlandish to get everyone to react. And I downplayed a lot of that. And I thought it was freeing pretty much at the time, thinking, you mean you don't, because I cared so much what people thought about me my whole life. And I was like, you mean you can say whatever you want and you don't care how people feel? You mean you don't? And at that point, I was like, wow, I want to be like that. I want to not care what people think about me. I want to make decisions for myself and not worry about how they affected everyone else, because I had lived, 10 years of my life for everybody else. I had lost, my 30s, and I guess it was a selfishness in me that thought, well, you guys don't know him. And I think that when I cut everybody off and left, they all knew that it was pointless to try and convince me of otherwise, because I had just up and left. And had they said anything bad about him, I probably would have cut them out of my life too. So I think the people that saw it, and then they saw me falling apart, and I'm sure part of them are like, maybe she is crazy. I mean, I've never seen her do this before. She's acting crazy. So, I'm sure it was just like you said, the perfect storm for the a horrific relationship. So,
But I'm sure, I mean, not, I think that's probably how a lot of these things happen. Like, that is how they're able to get the foot in the door, is just that perfect combination of circumstances leaving someone in a very vulnerable position. And it's just, I never would have considered the idea of, like, on your hand, needing the new slate, like the clean slate to kind of restart, almost having been a part of it. So how, I guess, because I know you mentioned it earlier and I was trying to make sure that, like, I could give it some breathing room at some point. Tatum had to have part of her freaking torso removed because of the cancer, correct?
yes, correct.
How, like, did they have to replace some of her ribs with metal, or how is that even possible?
So I don't even know the full term. It's called
Yeah.
something sclerodoma or dermatosarcoma protrusions. So again, if you want to talk about rare things, well, there's another word in there too that I can't remember. But when you talk about, like I said, Tatum, just like you shake your head. When she was diagnosed, there's only 30 cases in the United States. 99% of them happen geriatric patients.
Like, it
And
was ever,
she's
there had only ever been 30 cases.
per year, per year.
Okay.
And yeah, and it's all in geriatric patients. So when she developed a lump on her chest, and
Mhm.
it was we ignored it because it came up when my son hit her. And unless it was really serious, I learned very early on not to take Tatum into the doctors, because then it would be like they wouldn't let her go. And they would be like,
Mm.
well, what about this? So she came to me and she said it really hurt. It was about a month after it happened, but I didn't really investigate 'cause she didn't say anything. And she came to me and she said, Mom, I have this lump. And I said, is it so bad that we need to go to the ER? Because it was on the Sunday. And she said, yes. And I thought, that was my guise with her, is I would say, like, is it bad enough we need to go to the doctor? We need to, and she'd go, no, 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 no. And then I would know that it's not really that bad. We could deal with it on Monday. But when she
Yeah.
said that and she pulled it down to show me, I was like, oh, it was like probably the size of definitely golf ball, maybe a softball. And it had all these veins running through it, and just, it looked alive. And
Yeah.
so I had it removed. Of course, he was on vacation and was bothered that I asked him to come home, which he didn't want to do. But so they removed it and they said it was a blood clot. And I was like, okay. And I knew it wasn't. With Tatum, nothing is ever as simple as a blood clot.
Yeah.
But it took 3 months for them to send it out to different labs. And God bless the general surgeon that we had. Um, Shout out to him. He was out of Levine's hospital, because he sent it out and it came back. And at that point, he could have just chalked it up because it was like inconclusive. He could have just said, well, I'm sure it's nothing. But he sent it out to 4 or 5 different labs, and called me on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve to tell me that he needed to see me. Well, he didn't, but his assistant. And I remember calling him back and saying, I can't wait, until tomorrow. No surgeon is waiting for a follow up. Does she have cancer? And he said yes. So I guess I'm making that a long story, but so what they
No,
had to
you're
do
fine.
is they had to go in, and it's called clear the margins. The only cure for this type of cancer is pure removal, which is good and bad. Like, there's no, if you can remove it all, I'm knocking on wood here because it is Tatum, then the recurrence rate is very, very low. But the problem is that they had to go in and they have to take tissue around it, and then they have to test the tissue to see if they cleared all the margins, meaning if, like, within 2 standard deviations, it was cancer free. I think they had to go in 3 separate times to remove it. So where once we thought it was just gonna be, skin, and then it was supposed to be just muscle, they took bone, not enough that we had to do much about it, and she's so tiny, there was not much left of her, but they had to put balloons in her thighs to grow out the skin so that they could take the skin from her legs and graft her chest. It was brutal. It was, of all the things that I have watched people suffer through medically, and her as well, that was probably one of the worst times, and at a time when, I really, my brain had ditched out. I didn't have the resources, so I don't really remember a lot of it
Yeah.
because I was just and I think that had I recognized how truly painful it was for her, because I've heard how it's like a burn victim is one of the worst pain, it's on their
Yeah.
I don't think I could have dealt with it, or dealt with it.
I mean,
But yeah,
makes me cringe.
yeah. Yeah, and she made it, but she was definitely changed by it. She always had a very positive attitude and was a go-getter. And not that she's not anymore, but there was something in her, and I understood it was like, I'm out. Like, I went through all of this. I'm finally fine, and you lose my dad, and this is it. Like, I hit my brick wall. Um, but we got through it, and we were stronger for it. And she's a self-taught artist now, and she there's no reason why she should be here, like none. And she's another reason why I do what I do because, there's a reason why she's here. And I think it's really just to tell her story and show her resilience and just be that light that I think in this world right now everybody needs.
Yeah. And I want to get more into that, but just so we can tie things up here with where we were, how did you get yourself out of that? And I'm assuming that led to the rise of the organization.
Yeah, so we stayed together a whole decade, which was a miserable decade, but luckily he traveled a lot, so he was never around. He was really never here. Probably the last 2 years, COVID was in, we had split up and separated. The average woman takes about 7 times. Well, the average abused person takes about 7 times to actually make it stick. And um,
Oh,
m- yeah, yeah, because you kick them out and then you beg them back. It's a weird dynamic, but um, my son finally came to me, and my younger son, and if anyone really caught the brunt of his actions, it was my younger son. And he said, I don't really understand why you keep letting him back. He's threatened to kill you. He's threatened to kill me. He said,
really?
yeah, he said, I've lost my childhood. I don't come out of my room. I'm so afraid of him. When he walks in the door, I make sure my door's, jammed. And at that point, I just recognized that if I couldn't get out of it because I thought I deserved better, my children definitely deserved better. And that was kind of the beginning of the end. I think another reason why I put it off as long as I did is because he did travel. He wasn't home. It was manageable at that point. And my kids were so young that I knew he was going to come for me. I knew he was taking notes, and not to the extent. But I thought if I could just kick this along as long as I can, then my girls will be old enough, to like the thought of me putting him in a car with him, it's proven that he was a heavy cocaine user. He was definitely an alcoholic. And I knew being in a car without anything to say or anything to report would be very dangerous to them. So when it all came down to it, he came after me. We had an agreement in place. We had both decided to move our separate ways. He was living somewhere else, and he had cheated on me so many times. It could probably make me cry. And
Shock.
he said, yeah, and he said, go ahead, see whoever you want. Well, it was about a year, and finally I had met someone, and it was very casual dating, and we were out in public because I didn't think there was any reason to hide. We had made this agreement. Said he was going to sign it. He didn't want anything. But the whole time he was having me followed. So the minute that, they could get pictures of me, which I think is hilarious because I'm like, you could have just gone downtown and saw me. I wasn't hiding it. I didn't think I was doing
Yeah.
anything wrong.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, he came for me. He accused me of being a drug addict. He accused me of being an alcoholic, unstable. He said that I had all sorts of, again, personality disorders. He had text messages saved from like 5 years prior. He came, wanted my house. He wanted me to sell my house, which I paid for. He never contributed anything. So, it really came down to me fighting to prove that I wasn't everything he was saying I was, that he ironically was. And after about a 2-year battle and all my savings and half my house, I have sole custody, and he has no rights to them unless they want it. I've left the door open for them. If they would like to see him, then, I've always kept that door open as long as it's safe. So it was a battle, but that's another reason why I do what I do, because if they were babies and, the one time that he did take them out, he was drinking in the car, drinking 7 beers at lunch, driving them around carefree. And everyone kept
Mm.
saying, and everyone kept saying, that's not enough. It's not enough. Can you prove it? And I could, but it wasn't enough. And so my thing is, you know, it's never enough until it's too far and then you can't do anything about it. So I
Yeah.
also, another reason why I do it is because I think our family courts definitely need to be reformed a lot about what happens and giving people too much of a benefit of doubt at, taking the protection away from our children is wrong. So there's a lot of issues there.
So you just started the foundation last year, right?
I did. Yes, in September
Okay.
last year. Yeah.
And how long has it been since you left him?
We've been divorced, I think, since 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, I mean, what's this? Is it a one woman show over there and you're the one like working one on one with other women coming to you needing help with this stuff, or how is all of that working right now?
Right now, I am. I have board members that are helping guide us. We're working on business plans and funding, and but when I started, I wanted to provide mortgages. I wanted to provide, like I had all these things, and people kept coming to me and saying, "Oh, so and so, so and so does that." And what I saw really, and what I've come to realize is that there are organizations out there, but if you don't know they exist, and then they're not out there, and everybody goes straight to the government. And what the government's take on it is, when you lose everything, come back, and unfortunately you do. You lose everything, you slip into poverty, and then the government's like, okay, we're here to help, but you have nothing. So really our organization
Too
is
late.
yeah, yeah. And it takes the average woman a decade to recover from divorce. Um, so our organization is really founded on, you know, we're building and compiling databases, because when you hit crisis, like you don't even know what you need. And that's one of
Mhm.
the biggest hurdles, like people are, what can I do to help? You don't even know. So what we're trying to do is, find these little charities, find out what people are eligible for, find out what the eligibility requirements are so that we can say, fill this out. So they're not, the last thing you have time to do is research. So if we have everything for you, you come to us, we can say, okay, here's a financial advisor, call them. Here is, you need mortgage assistance, these people, and figure out exactly what they need so that it takes the burden off of them and they can literally just try and get through it. And whatever, which we found, things that no one will,
Yeah.
unless you are destitute, which is legal fees. Like, the average, I can't, I've talked to people that have lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting for something, like I was fighting my husband for things he never lost. He just wanted me to look bad. Like that's all he wanted, money. He wanted me to look bad. I never said he couldn't see the kids, but he was telling everyone I couldn't. So, just stuff like that. We just don't want women to be in a position where they, I couldn't protect my kids. I couldn't fight back because I just had to make nice because I was running out of resources. And when that happens, like I couldn't even email my lawyer without getting a $25 bill. And then you don't make wise choices for your kids because you just want to settle, get it over with. And everybody says, oh, you can't go for sole custody. You can't. Just,
Yeah.
he'll never. And so basically, our charity isn't just for divorce. It isn't just for illness. It's for women who hit a point, whether that's, special needs parent who, like you said, doesn't have resources. Like I couldn't get Tatum RSV vaccines, which could have killed her if she didn't have it. They were $1,000, but I know where to find them, So if somebody comes to me, oh, well, there's this little place that will take care of trachs. So that's where we're trying to gain the knowledge, build networks with companies who will hire women for gainful employment, not minimum wage, remotely, so they can work out of the house, so that the children aren't only losing a two-parent home, but they're losing both parents at the same time. And just kind of be a concierge service when you come to us. But again, I'm still figuring out. I won't take money from people until I know what I'm doing with those funds. I feel very
Yeah.
guided by responsibility. So the best thing that I do right now is I'm just trying to get a landscape of what women really need. And it's really dire out there right now, especially for a stay-at-home mom who hasn't been in the workforce, who hits a rough patch and they haven't protected themselves. So we see it in many facets, but we're building databases and trying to network. And but if anyone does want to get involved, there's I do man all of it. So if you need help, if you want to get involved, if you want to learn more about our organization, it's all on my website. And we encourage anybody to reach out if you have somebody, even if it's a third party, if you know of someone who would be open to, discussing it. Um, I'm finding my way, I guess I should say.
You want to tell everyone the name of the website?
Well, so if you go to my website, which is juliebarthauthor.com, there's actually three websites, but if you just go to juliebarthauthor.com, there's a tab for our organization, cjboutreach.org. And then my daughter's art, which is Hope, number 4, Tayt. Um, my daughter, who had cancer and is, primordial dwarfism, she's a self-taught artist. So all of her art, when you purchase her art, and you can put it on different things, and portion of the proceeds goes to fund the charity. So it kind of all feeds into one another. You can get my books, my podcasts, and again, even if it's just for informational purposes, there isn't a big organization. It's just me for now. Hopefully, we're hoping to do it locally, build this
On
database, see how it works, and then move nationally.
Yeah, and I was thinking as you were talking about specific on the legal side of things with what you're doing, have you heard of the Innocence Project before?
I have, yes.
So,
Mhm.
I was, it would be cool if you were able to maybe connect with other lawyers who have been through what you've been through, who are willing to pitch in pro bono work for that kind of stuff. And if that's something that you're able to grow into over the years, where that is also part of the services that we can offer is we can get you some of this free counseling, at least early on, for some legal counsel to make sure you are protected through this process. And I mean, there's so many facets to all of it. Like that's overwhelming. Yeah.
It is, and the problem is that there are services out there for that. Don't get me wrong.
Mhm.
There's all these stipulations, like you can't have an income, and in the state of South Carolina, you have to be separated for an entire year before you can go through with the divorce. But that entire year, you are going on a combined. You're going from last year's W-2 and what you used to have, not what you have now. So you can't get aid because you have to be below the poverty level to get any kind of aid. I found another organization that was willing to help women, and then they had all these stipulations. You can't be accused of adultery. Well, whether it's true or not, just if you're being accused, they won't help you. So,
Yeah.
that is where it's really hard we're trying to lay that groundwork so that I know what I'm talking about. And I've tried all of these things because I hear these things like, oh, they'll do it. And then I send someone to, and they'll come back and say, oh, well, no, they said that this isn't true. So, we're putting all of these assumptions that people have to task. And our hope is that we will farm out things that are already there. And then what we will do is focus on the things that we can't find anywhere else because we're hoping to have funds and resources to do that. And obviously, yes, we would love to have a legal team. And I know a lot of, people that would be able to help. Um, so, again, it's trying to find our niche in the market. I don't want to take funds until I know where they're going. And I certainly don't want to replicate services that are already there because it's a waste of everyone's time and money. I would rather point the people to the charities that want people and to the charities of people that they want than to, get in the middle of it and waste funds doing what someone else is already doing.
People keep telling me I need to start a nonprofit. It's like every speaking engagement that I do, people are like, yeah, you need to start a nonprofit. I'm like, there's so many out there. Like, I don't know what I would add that's not already there. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, and that truly is the problem is that there are people that are falling through the cracks, but you don't know until you try things out what really works, what really doesn't. And that's why, I will go back to the situation with that boy with the trach. Um, had I not taken the time to, first of all, find this little children's section that I then told everyone else about, but, went on the news, talked about what it is. Sometimes it doesn't take a non for profit per se, but sometimes it just literally takes an awareness that things are going on, because there's someone out there listening who does have a non-for-profit that might say,
Yes.
"Oh, you know what? I want to team up with us." And that's what it takes. It takes all these charities, as small as you are, in saying, "Okay, well, if you'll take care of that part, I'll take care of this part. I'll send people your way. You send people my way. Let's not cross tie what we do." And there are
Totally.
so many great charities. There really are, but if you can't get the word out there, then nobody knows you exist, and then you can't get funding because you don't have anybody to help. But there are plenty of people out there to help, so
Yeah. Well, it's cool that you're doing that too, because it's like it doesn't need to be a competition between the nonprofits. Why should it
well, and
eval
again
serve? Yeah.
yeah, and again, if somebody else is willing to take that part, that just means that we can help you in 5 different ways rather than just one. Then let's get your mortgage taken care of. Let's get childcare for you. And you can't get this component. Well, that we can easily take care of because it doesn't take huge resources because we're just doing this thing for you and we can get that passed through the board. So that's kind of our thought process on it and how hopefully we're differing from other charities and other charities will join us.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Are you doing this full time now?
Well, between the books and the podcasts, yeah, pretty much. It hasn't, I'm still a writer, so I still do freelance contracting work, but there's only so many HVAC articles you can write, and
Well, yeah.
occasionally, Chat GBT is has put a damper on my writing career. Not
Yeah.
completely, but yeah, the world's changing so quickly, and will continue to in the next 5 years, even from where AI was till now. So I think we're just trying to put a little bit of humanistic back into it because I don't think ChatGPT cares that much about you if you don't have money to pay for something. So
Yeah, I don't know. And it's interesting because I think eventually, I mean, we're going to end up where now these different large language models are the root of every piece of like software that's out there that has any sort of search. And it's just,
yeah,
I don't know. I don't, it's hard because they are such a huge asset, but
yes.
I am,
It is. There's gotta be some, yeah, I mean, let's not dive into it too quickly. I think
yeah,
that's true of anything. You don't see the potential downside and even in an emotional abusive relationship, you don't see the potential downside to something until you're so immersed and dependent on it that you no longer can get out of it. And I think
yeah.
AI, anything that you do that you just go head into and like, this is great. And then all of a sudden it's not so great, but you have become so dependent on it that you don't know how to go back to what you were doing
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. I think people, people just need to be mindful of how you're using it. I think it's going to get integrated into everything, whether we like it or not. But I think on an individual level, if you're very mindful of not offloading your cognitive workload onto ChatGPT just for the sake of laziness, like we'll be all right. But with all of this, can I ask you a couple of tougher questions that I kind of thought of while we were talking through your story?
Yes.
Okay. So, you'd mentioned one of your sons saying basically I've lost my childhood. Like I catch all this flack from this dude. How are your relationships with all your kids now? Are they all adults now?
No, I have, my oldest is gonna be 29 this year, and my youngest is 12. Um,
Okay.
I can say that we were just somewhat blessed that he didn't live here for many years. So, and again, that probably sounds like me making excuses because I am. But, as of right now, the son that came to me, um he always understood. He's a very empathetic soul, and he always gave me the grace to understand that I couldn't see out of what I was doing, and I don't think, you could ask him, sure, is there some blame that he does, for the loss of his childhood? I'm sure. But he's also been forgiving enough to understand that I was being manipulated and that I couldn't see out of it. And yeah, it's taken some more you know, I remember the first time I came to him and I said, "Hey, listen, I owe you a huge apology. Every time that you said how bad it was with your stepdad, I tried to minimize it. I tried to say you were overreacting. And I said, I recognize now, and for any parent out there, even if you don't agree with what your kid is saying, even if you think they're overreacting, even if you don't see what they see, I recognize that I was at fault for not at least giving him the breathing room to, or putting myself in his shoes, being the age he was, to, acknowledge his suffering and say,
Yeah.
okay, let's have that conversation. So I think it's changed me in many ways to, understand that we're all just trying to figure stuff out. Kids go through their phases where you don't like them sometimes, but you always love them. And parents do too. And, again, I think my kids have given me enough grace to look and see, like, God, I don't know how she did it all those years. I guess in parting, my youngest son, he he had memories that I didn't really recognize he had. So this past week we went back to Chicago and we went to a Cubs game, and just to see the sheer joy on his face and to hear him finally voice, like, I'd always wanted to go to a Cubs game. And we got to see his grandfather and to say, "Oh, I miss Pop so much." And I was like, I didn't even think that you remembered him. And so I think I've come to a place where I stopped bouncing and trying to rewrite history and pretending that things are hunky dory all the time and fantastic. And, don't look over here. We're perfect. We're a family,
Yeah.
perfect family. To recognize that everybody's imperfect, and in the imperfection is where you really find the human connection that you have with people. So I hope we're all on the mend. It's a
Yeah.
daily process. Someone's always mad at me. I'll give you that. With 6 kids, someone's always upset with me for some reason.
Everyone has family drama and you have a big family, so I don't know how you couldn't have something going on all the time.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
true.
But
Yeah, I will say though, we found a peace in our family that we have, um, my ex-husband was always pitting people against one another, because if you pit two people against one another, then you no longer are the focus and you can do what you want because you got
yeah.
these two,
Yeah.
There's just peace in my house. People get upset with one another, but we went through years where people weren't talking to one another. There was always some drama. There was always, major, major ordeals. And now, like, we all wake up and we're just okay. Like, just be okay and have peace sounds so easy, but for so many years it wasn't. And now it is. I wake up not worried about who's lying, cheating, who's going to steal from me. I mean, he would bottom out our bank accounts because he'd go gambling the night before. To wake up, yeah, I wake up every morning and think, what, I don't have to wonder who's sabotaging or who's watching me or following me, or yeah,
It's kind of
it's a
hard
great
not to
feeling.
feel peace after that. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
fuck. That is
Yeah.
so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I say that, like, my very worst day today is 10 times better than my very best day for an entire decade. So
Kind of easy to be positive after that. But
yeah, and people say to me, like, I still have 2 at home, and, Tatum lives in the cottage with my mother, and they say, "Oh gosh, your house must be so chaotic." I'm like, "You have no idea. This is, like, the easiest I've ever dealt with." Knock on
yeah.
wood again. I always knock on wood, but, yeah, life seems to have gotten so much more unencumbered. It's amazing because it wasn't the illnesses that really took me down. It was that relationship.
Yeah. Well, I hope you can pass along to Tatum that I think she is just a badass. Like she's that the toughness, man. Even just when I was looking into you and reading about the little bit of your story that I came into this knowing about, I mean, just please pass along to her that she is a freaking warrior. Like, and you are too. I know, I hope you realize that, but
Yeah.
God,
Yeah, not like her, not like her.
just
Yeah, she's a little spitfire, and it's funny because everyone always is, "Oh, she's so cute, she's so cute." I'm like, she is."
that is the spiteful side of her.
Yeah, I wouldn't cross her either, just saying. Her cuteness can be uncute, so not to be messed with her. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
funny.
she's stubborn as hell. I mean, that's probably why she's still here, but she is very, very set in her ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let her know that she's a stud. So
I will
that's
definitely, I will tell her
that's
so.
cool. If I
Yeah.
could see her art, I would go buy some, but it's gonna, I don't know. Hopefully someone hearing this will. So that's,
Yeah.
thank
Hopefully.
you. Thank you for taking the time. I will have juliebarthauthor.com linked below. You got anything else you want to tell anybody about before we wrap this thing up?
I don't think so. I just think, I've been on a lot of podcasts and, I guess they're the new self-help, but I really appreciate that people like you are coming forward and you're commenting on my strength and, for you to do this and come on and I give you so much credit. You're listening to everyone else's story while they're telling it, but you have a story of your own. I think that's a pretty amazing thing to do. So I'm giving you the same warrior as you're giving Tayte.
Well, compliments make me uncomfortable, so let's wrap
I
this
know.
up.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone at home for listening to another episode of Going In Blind. Remember, the best way to help spread the word about this thing, other than sharing it around, is to leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. And if you prefer watching your podcasts, you can do that with this one now. These are now video on YouTube, so go check us out and subscribe there too. And I'll see you next time.